I'm going to post now.
All right. Hello, everyone. Today, we're fortunate that Doctors in Politics is hosting Dr. Dara Kass. She's an ER physician at Columbia University. She's a parent, and she's also a COVID commentator on MSNBC and has accomplished a lot in her career thus far. We're very fortunate to have her today for 15 minutes on Facebook Live talking about COVID and its impact on schools and families. With COVID infections on the rise, schools are really grappling on decisions on whether to close, and families who may have spent the Thanksgiving holiday apart from loved ones are also having to kind of make that decision for Christmas and New Year's. Feel free to post any questions you have on the Facebook comments. I'm going to ask Dr. Kass those questions that you guys post, and we'll make sure to get through every single one. With further ado, we'll have Dr. Dara Kass talk about her topic. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Surgeon. I wanted to actually be very, very brief in my introduction because I wanted to get to questions because I think that the decision fatigue we've already been going through over the last 10 months is actually at a peak right now. And I'm learning this as my new role is what I call the COVID concierge, which is basically getting incoming questions from a lot of my friends and family about the decisions they need to make in their own lives regarding exposures, quarantine, isolation, school policies, knowing now that after 10 months of this pandemic, school is actually a very safe place for our children. But as the virus rages all over the country, our safety profile of school gets harder and harder as our quarantine needs get higher. And so I really wanted to open up the floor for questions because I think that there's a lot of scenarios out there that people have been dealing with that I want to make sure we are talking about so people feel empowered when this hits their own front door. So I'll give you a scenario that I got on Facebook from a friend today, and I think that it's pretty common and it's going to happen a lot, which is that there was an exposure in a class outside of New York City, actually, in a town that has a reasonably high positive test rate, where there was an elementary school child that was in the classroom with another child who was positive, and they asked the whole classroom to quarantine for 2 weeks. They then said, what do we do with the sibling? And the issue there really is the level of exposure and really stopping the spreads. The way I approach these decisions when there's an exposure for anybody I know, especially within the family, is to say, my goal first and foremost is to stop the spread outside of my house. So if there's a reasonably high risk that there was an exposure in my family, and that usually isn't in school, right? That's that you found out that your grandparent is positive and you all had dinner together, or that your child went on a play date and it shared a meal with somebody else, or that you found out that maybe your domestic help, your nanny, your cleaning lady, whoever it is positive and was in your house. Then I generally quarantine the whole family and say, everyone stay home together as a unit. But if the risk is shared amongst the family, I don't generally say to quarantine individuals from each other. But no matter what happens, the spread gets stopped by the family. If for some reason one person is high risk to have been infected or is symptomatic, that person gets quarantined from everybody else. The issue with kids and our families generally is that trying to minimize the trauma to our kids from exposure and also the quarantine and the fatigue, because the more we isolate our kids from our families, the harder it is to get them to do it again. And not every exposure is the same level of risk. So what I say, honestly, is try to stop the spread within your family first. Introduce as many barriers within your family as you can. So if there's somebody that's a high risk within the group, have them eat separately from everybody else. You can wear masks amongst your family if you're together and you think that you want to add an additional level of protection. But if, for example, you don't want to add those protections, and a lot of those times it's when you have younger children, I would accept that your whole family is going to have to quarantine for as long as the last person turns positive. So if after 5 or 6 days, somebody in your family turns positive, then you're going to have to restart that period of time after you isolate that person away from the family, if that makes sense. So we'll talk more about the numbers, but I wanted to open with that. It's a really difficult decision what to do with siblings. It's not perfect. And your goal should be to stop the spread outside of your house. So that's the first question. Do you want me just to answer them or you want to ask me?
All right, Dr. Dara Kass. I have a few questions here. I don't know, can you see the questions on your end?
I see 2.
Oh, perfect. You can just answer them as they go.
Is there a safe way to safely commute in a vehicle with people outside our own households? So the answer is masks, windows open would be the best answer. And I've seen this happen where we've had contagious people in the same car, masks open, no spread. So if you're going to ride in a vehicle with somebody that isn't in your family, please wear masks and keep the windows open. But it is not ideal. Whereas a lot of these car services like Uber and Lyft are actually pretty safe because there's a barrier between you and the driver. Should immune-compromised kids or severe asthma kids return to school? So my answer there is actually yes. So my son had a liver transplant when he was 2 years old. A lot of people know that. He's been in school since the day it started in like Labor Day in September. The masks work, social distancing works, and their kids right now are less risk at school than they are in the community. There hasn't been a lot of data on high risk, like conversion to high risk from the infection for children that have asthma or even immune compromised conditions. And there's lots of nuances on that. But I would say that the risk of the social and social developmental cost to the kids by not being in school does not outweigh the likelihood of them getting a serious infection in school. So I would definitely keep the kids in school as long as your physician supports it. Are there certain activities should not be in school? Absolutely, there are certain activities that should not be in school. The way that I discuss risk for activities has to do with, so there's two ways to think of an activity. One is transactional and one is gathering. The gathering activities, when you stay in the same place with somebody for long periods of time, get less and less safe the more you introduce things like speaking loudly, projecting your voice, loud music, blowing like a wind instrument. So those are the activities that I would not promote in school. So choir is a great thing to do virtually. Band is probably a great thing to do virtually, whereas strings can probably be done at school. I would not have theater practice. Those things should be done virtually until we get this pandemic under control because they are not conducive to the environments that decrease the spread of the virus. Ryan has an issue with the claims that schools are safe places. Okay, so I don't know why you have an issue with that. So children may be asymptomatic, but we are testing, certainly in New York City, a huge number of children and adults. And more importantly, we see those that spread continue as it gets to adults. There is no evidence that children are spreading the virus in schools and nobody is finding out about it. Kids that are symptomatic are being tested. We're having a lot of surveillance testing in the schools. I know multiple schools that are doing weekly testing and not seeing any cases. So the other issue is that it's not as much about whether or not the kids are infected, it's are they transmitting the virus? And we're really not seeing student to student or student to teacher viral transmission. The only places that the risk gets a little higher is actually teacher to student or teacher to teacher. And that's because of the way teachers move in the spaces. And also the likelihood of them having activities outside of the classroom that are less limited, that are freer because they're grown-ups. We have no information on the pediatric COVID vaccine, but as we vaccinate the adult population, we will get a better sense of the risk to the kids by extension of the adults the risk to the population writ large will get lower as adults can no longer get infected. So the vaccines that have been studied so far go as early as 12 in their early trials. There's no data yet. And so we will not see children get vaccinated probably till Q2 as early as possible. But it doesn't really matter because they're mask wearing and staying distance to start and they can stay in school. And we need to get the vulnerable people vaccinated to protect them. Please don't go to Georgia to canvass. I am a huge fan of political advocacy, but right now we don't think anyone should travel. If you're local in Georgia and you're going to canvass, that's one thing. But traveling to Georgia to canvass right now is not recommended because we really just don't want people traveling. So I would say stay home, stay safe, make calls, and donate to campaigns. With kids who live with elderly grandparents, should they be held outside of school? That is a very difficult decision. Obviously, elderly grandparents have been at risk the entire time. The more elderly people are exposed to the outside world, the harder it is for them. School is still not a high risk activity if somebody else, let's say, is going to work, which they probably are. And more importantly, can you kind of casually quarantine the kids from the grandparents? So do they have different bathrooms or bedrooms? If your family is very enmeshed and it's very difficult to quarantine from each other, you may consider limiting all outside engagement, but school would be the lowest risk activity for any member of your family to go to versus the general community spread that we're seeing just by walking in the street and doing other things. I've seen research that older kids transmit similarly to adults. That's true. And so what we really need to remind our teenagers and our college students, and in a lot of ways, they're higher risk because they just behave worse, meaning that they're not as good at mask wearing, they're more casual, they're less concerned about getting it. A lot of grown-ups, especially people my age, are more diligent about mask wearing and spacing, even if we all transmit the virus the same way. So the way I describe it is that our biggest responsibility is to inform and support our teenagers and young adults that they need to wear masks and stay distance as much as they can to protect other people, even if they're not as worried about themselves. What is my take on basketball season? I don't have one because all the protocols that have been put in place in the NBA and the NCAA are so far from how we deal with community spread right now. I do not think we should be playing contact sports, any of us right now. I think they should be on pause for all kids, even when they're wearing masks, because the fact that the virus is everywhere. But I don't think that weighing in on how leagues do their work, considering they have extraordinary testing and different protocols, is a worthwhile conversation in 15 minutes for what our decisions we need to make. I am really sorry about 3-year-olds and their energy. Indoor masked playdates are better than indoor unmasked playdates. And 3-year-olds probably do not spread this virus very much. So if it's your sanity or your indoor mask playdate, go for your indoor mask playdate. However, really stay there and watch them. Wash their hands ahead of time. Make sure they stay their masks on. Keep it either windows open, big spaces. Try to keep them, kind of maybe even coordinated play as opposed to integrated play. But you really want to make sure that you are decreasing the likelihood that if one of those, you're going to have to quarantine if you find out that the person is positive, but it's not about the quarantine as much as it is the actual risk of transmission. And you want to put as many of those barriers in place, and everything you do is better than not doing. Sharing school supplies schools have gotten very, very good at this, which is wiping down and not using common materials that much. With mask wearing and washing of hands, it is relatively unlikely that you're going to get this kind of surface spread with like pens, but generally I think that they're wiping things down between kids. I would say sharing less is better, but I'm not that worried about the markers being the source of spread as I am in the hospital when I worry about like our keyboards or our surfaces between patients not getting wiped down fast enough. Somebody asked about metrics for closing in-person learning. This is actually super complicated. So every school district gets to make their own decisions. And originally we were saying a 5% positive test rate. Now we're looking much more at the testing amongst communities and really what's happening in your schools. What I would say is this: in states that are not testing, they're also not usually advising strong quarantines. So for me, I think our threshold is going to get met when a critical mass of our students in New York are quarantining due to community exposure. So, 2-3 kids are positive because our numbers in the city are so high. That brings a risk, and you're seeing classes and classes peel off to quarantine. I think we're going to hit our inflection point and have to go remote just by the virtue of too many people quarantining. If those states are not implementing those quarantine rules, then that inflection point is not going to hit the same way. And what I would say is the minute that you find your children exposed regularly, just keep them at home because there's only so much good protocols can do when your community spread is that high. In states with a 20% positive test rate, I just can't see school remaining safe, even if you have a fraction of that transmissibility in a school of 500 kids. You're still talking about having 10 cases, if that math worked, but it's enough cases to be concerned. Any tricks about explaining the need for quarantine to kids? So this is probably, if this is my last question, because I don't know how long we're going to be, and I've been talking fast. Kids need to understand that the reason they quarantine is to protect other people, just like we protect them. And we need to talk about quarantine early before they have to do it, because we don't want them to think that they're infected or that they're dangerous, and we don't want to treat them like they have cooties. So the way I describe it to my kids and I tell people is we all run the risk of having to quarantine, so we keep other people safe. We as a family will make a decision about how to protect each other in our family, but no matter what, we're going to stop the spread from getting out of our house. And that's the most important thing, because our family believes in keeping other families safe. To me, when you frame it that way, it removes the responsibility from the kid. I've seen this happen by accident, which is a bunch of people inadvertently make the kid feel like they've done something wrong. And it's so hard. So talk early and frequently about the risk of quarantine that could happen to anybody, and empower your kid to decide what the plan is to keep everyone safe. Deliver them cool snacks in their bedroom if they really do have to quarantine by themselves. Sit with them and watch a movie with both of the masks on. Still love and hug your child, just sometimes potentially with a mask if you have to. But make them part of the solution and empower them to realize that this is about keeping other kids safe and other grown-ups safe, especially maybe their grandparents. Am I out of time, or can I do more? I mean, this is fun.
No, if this is all the time you got, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Kass. We really appreciate, everything you've been doing, being on the front lines, especially in an area that has such a high positivity rate.
No, we're okay for now. Don't say that.
Okay, well, I hope it stays low. I know at one time it was high, but thank you so much. And I really appreciate all the advocacy work you've been doing through MSNBC, through social media, and so forth. So keep up the good fight. Thank you so much.
No worries. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.